joining us. My name is Catherine Carlton. I'm Executive Director of Orchestras Canada, Orchestre Canada. For my visual description, I'm a late 50s white woman with short gray hair wearing an aqua hoodie, and my background is all about painting, books, and a lot of sheet music. I join you today from my home office in Peterborough, Nogojiwanong, on the traditional land of the Mississauga Anishinaabe people, covered by the Williams Treaty. Through the treaties and land claims processes, Hiawatha First Nation, Curve Lake First Nation, Alderville First Nation, and the Mississaugas of Scugog First Nation have been established in this area. At Orchestras Canada, we are committed to the processes of reconciliation, honoring the teachings of our First Peoples and their care for this beautiful place. As this is a national gathering, I invite you to consider the long history of the land you live and work on and to learn about its traditional stewards. OC, along with the Association for Opera in Canada, the Canadian Association for the Performing Arts, the Canadian Dance Assembly, and the Professional Association of Canadian Theatres, is so pleased to be co-hosting today's session with Tim Dolan of Kickframe and the Arts Firm. I also thank Danielle Allard and Merrick Redburn, our simultaneous interpreters. This session is part of the ArtsBoost digital marketing and fundraising series, generously funded by the Canada Council for the Arts through their Digital Strategy Fund. With the Council's help, over 100 artists and arts workers have gone through an intensive digital arts marketing and fundraising training program. And today's session is the second of 2 booster webinars by Tim. Tim will soon get to work on the design of a self-guided online digital arts marketing and fundraising course, distilling the best of ArtsBoost, which will be launched in 2022. This has been a wonderful collaboration with Tim, the Arts Firm, and our colleague Art Service organizations, and we're grateful to everyone for their participation, their enthusiasm, and their support. I'll now pass the mic to Lauren for some technical details.
Thank you, Catherine. Hi all, my name is Lauren Drew and I'm Director of Member Services and Learning for Orchestras Canada. My visual description is that I am a woman in my 20s with shoulder-length brown hair, black glasses, and I'm wearing a red and white striped shirt. Behind me is a white wall with a green Trent University degree and a poster that has a bridge going over a river. I'm also very grateful to be joining you from Peterborough, Nogojiwanong, Ontario, the place at the end of the rapids on the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe. I've grown up in this area and I'm so appreciative of the care and stewardship of this land that has shaped me. A few tech notes before we start. So first of all, greetings to everyone who is joining us here in Zoom, as well as on the Facebook Live, where we're streaming right now. Because of the technical aspects, if you'd like to see closed captioning, please head over to the Facebook Live. We'll paste a link in the chat for that. In other tech notes, please keep your video and audio muted throughout to reduce background noise. And notice that we are recording today's session in English and French, which we'll be able to send to you afterward. Please use the chat box in Zoom or in the comments section on Facebook to interact with each other, as well as to pose any questions that you have for Tim. There will be a Q&A period at the end, and we'll try to get to your questions of that. We'll circulate resources from this session, including the PowerPoint and the recordings in the coming weeks. And you'll notice in the chat that I've pasted instructions to enable live simultaneous interpretation in French and English, and that's through Zoom. Thank you again, Merrick and Danielle. And with that, I will hand it over to our wonderful presenter, Tim. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you very much, Lauren, and thank you very much, Catherine. My name is Tim Dolan, and as a visual description, I'm a white male with a shaved bald head, blue eyes, and I'm wearing a black shirt. My background has a whiteboard, a plant, and plenty of books. My pronouns are he and him. And today I'm coming to you from Toronto, and I acknowledge that this land is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. So for those of you who I haven't yet met, I'm a digital marketing and strategy consultant and trainer, and I'm the founder of Kickframe. We work with organizations to build strategies and plans and to upskill marketing teams. Over my career, I've had trained over 1,000 marketers in Canada, and most recently, as Catherine mentioned, I've had the pleasure of designing and delivering the digital marketing and fundraising for the arts course, which many of the participants, and I see many of your names, have taken. That's enough about me. Let's get into our session. Our focus today is to discuss how arts administrators can effectively test and learn from new digital marketing and fundraising activities, and to start to build a test and learn culture. A reminder again that the session will be recorded and the slides will be available for download. The chat window is also open throughout the session, and we will leave time at the end to answer those questions that we can get to. So, why a webinar, a training session on testing and learning for digital marketing and fundraising in the arts? When we initially discussed this topic, I was reminded of a difficult meeting that I had with a client. It was a chief marketing officer, and they turned to their team and said, "We do the same thing over and over again. It seems like we never learn." It was a hard comment for everyone to hear, but the reality was there was some truth in it. In marketing and fundraising, we often find ourselves working in a feverish pace. It can feel impossible to find the time to think about, let alone to try something new. It can feel like we are a hamster on a wheel going around and around. However, now is the time for us to embrace change. As everyone in the arts knows all too well, we are navigating a period of incredible disruption. Arts organizations have had to try new approaches due to COVID simply as a way to survive. And while this has been extraordinarily painful and challenging, a small silver lining is that arts organizations have started to use digital media and technology in new ways. Necessity, after all, is the mother of invention. In fact, research bears this out. A study from Capacity Interactive showed that 83% of arts organizations use digital in new ways because of COVID. And 93% agree that digital marketing will play a critical role in reopening. And the opportunities for experimentation with digital channels and tactics are really ripe today. As we have discussed in the DMFA program, the nature of digital media and technology provides marketers and fundraisers with a greater ability to use data to more granularly measure the impact of new approaches. Digital tools or digital communication platforms like Google Ads or Facebook are making it easier for organizations to run tests and make adjustments. And more organizations are starting to embrace agile processes and workflows that are designed to use results and learnings from past activities to inform future decisions. For organizations that adopt a test and learn culture, there are a number of significant benefits. Marketers and fundraisers can mitigate risk through tests and trials. Teams can improve performance by scaling the lessons learned through testing and experimentation. And organizations can try new concepts more quickly based on trends or signals that they might see in the marketplace. However, there are a number of barriers that organizations need to overcome in order to establish a structure and a culture around testing and learning, particularly within the arts. Teams must not only be given the permission, but the mandate to test and experiment, understanding that some experiments may, quote unquote, fail. Teams must also be given the resources and time necessary to run tests. And teams need to understand how to properly plan and run tests and capture and apply those learnings, which is why we're here today. Because after all, the biggest barrier to overcome is the acceptance that experimentation equals risk. But taking risks through testing and learning is the most effective way to get off the hamster wheel. And that concludes my use of hamster GIFs for the duration of the presentation. So, what are we going to cover? we're going to cover what to test, how to test, applying learning. I have a art-specific case example, and then finally, we'll talk a little bit about scaling testing before we open it up to your questions and a summary. Okay, so now that we've talked about why we should test and learn, let's talk about the first step, figuring out what to test. Figuring out what to test should really be driven by what you need to improve. What are the most pressing goals or challenges that your organization is facing? Do you need to increase the awareness of your organization and your events? Do you need to increase conversion rates for sales or donations? Do you need to boost retention and get your patrons coming back to a larger degree? One way that you can frame these goals is by using a framework like a patron journey. This visualizes the steps that patrons take toward completing an action that you want them to take, such as buying a ticket or making a donation. Where along your journey might there be opportunities to address a particular challenge or to introduce a moment of delight to your patrons? In what areas of marketing or fundraising do you need to improve performance the most? This framework can also be used to identify new ideas, things that you aren't doing today. By seeing gaps in the framework, you can identify opportunities that you can explore in the future. For example, your organization might be seeing declining conversion rates for online sales. By identifying this issue, you can identify what ideas or tactics that you may want to test to improve performance. These tactics could include simplifying your landing page, showing remaining tickets to build a sense of urgency, or providing new options for more flexible payment. It can be a useful exercise to use this framework as a way to brainstorm potential ideas to test, ideally with a team member or two. Once you have a list of different tests or ideas that you want to experiment with, you can start to prioritize which ideas you want to put into action. One way that you can do this is through prioritization. Prioritizing or by scoring different ideas and tests based on their relative impact to your organization and their relative complexity or cost to execute. So taking a look at these tests and evaluating how much value does this represent to the organization potentially, and how complicated or costly or timely might this test be to be able to execute. By using a matrix like this, and you see sample scores here on the slide, you'll be able to identify those tests that make the most sense to pursue first. Another way to think about identifying the most important areas or ideas to test is to consider how much evidence you have that your current approach will be successful. This is particularly useful when you are exploring a brand new idea or approach. You may have assumptions that it will work, but very little evidence. For example, your board might be interested in pursuing a new subscription model. If you haven't done this before, you will have little evidence if it will be successful or not. You focus on tests that will help you to understand if your approach is going to be viable or not. For example, you might consider tests involving focus groups or patron interviews to see if the option is desirable. Focus your tests on what is most important for you to achieve and what is most important for you to know. And finally, you can start to build a testing roadmap. It doesn't need to look like this. This may be more complicated or extensive than what you need, but it's a roadmap for your organization based on your prioritization results. The number and the sequence of tests that you'll run will be determined by your plans and your priorities, and most importantly, in many ways, the resources that you have available, people and time and tools. The idea is that you do not want tests and experiments to feel scattered. Rather, they should build on each other and create a deeper understanding in an area that's important to you. So in order to understand what to test, we need to frame opportunities in the context of a patron journey, identify ideas and tests that represent the greatest opportunity, prioritize those ideas and tests based on value and complexity, and plan for tests to build knowledge over time. Now that we've determined what to test, we need to discuss how to test. This will depend on the nature of what you want to test and learn. You can think of tests as two sides of the same coin. One side is discovery, testing new ideas or concepts, and the other side is validation, testing to refine an existing approach or solution. When your focus is to discover, testing is done without the fear of failure or a specific expectation. You can think of these tests as sensing, gathering more data and evidence to guide the future, in some cases, bigger picture plans. Discovery tests tend to be more qualitative as we gather data and feedback around an area that we want to learn more about. Examples of common discovery-focused tests include subject matter expert interviews, focus groups with patrons, perhaps even online research using search trends or conversations and posts in public social forums. When your focus is to validate rather than discover, testing is done with an expectation of a winner or to support a particular assumption. You can think of these tests as competing rather than sensing, where we want to prove our assumption or our current course of action is best. Validation tests tend to be more quantitative, as we gather in many cases marketing and fundraising campaign performance data to inform future plans. Examples of common validation-focused tests include split tests, where we measure the difference between alternative approaches, an ad or pre-sale or pre-registration tests or campaigns, where we might look at performance data from a campaign prior to actually launching, and patron feedback surveys, where we can measure attributes like perception and satisfaction. Regardless of the intent of our tests, at the foundation of testing is a hypothesis. A hypothesis is an assumption or an idea that is proposed for the sake of argument so that it can be tested to see if it might be true. A hypothesis can be used both for discovery and validation tests. A well-structured hypothesis is foundational to any testing and learning program. To be effective, a hypothesis statement needs to be clear, specific, simple, measurable, defined, and relevant to whatever you want to learn. It can be very helpful to have a standard template that your team uses to be able to create hypothesis statements. Here is an example using a common if, by, will, because format. We're capturing the context of our test, the variable that we are changing, the result that we are aiming for, along with our supporting rationale. As an example, here's a hypothesis statement from an actual test run by eBay many years ago. At the time, marketers were debating the value of paying for search ads targeting branded keywords, as we've explored at length during the DMFA course, essentially paying for search ads when somebody enters the term eBay into a search field. Some folks felt at eBay that these ads were important for driving traffic to the website. Others thought they were not important at all. These kinds of debates are a great starting point for tests when there's different ideas and points of view being discussed. So the eBay team designed a test. Their hypothesis statement likely looked something like this. If we change our search advertising by stop paying for branded terms, we will not lose visitors to the website because people will click on an organic link. eBay ran this test, and what did they find? They found that their hypothesis was proven correct. When eBay stopped paying for search ads that targeted their brand keywords, searchers just clicked on the organic listings to visit their website. They had strong brand recognition, and people that were searching had strong search intent. Website visitation did not suffer, and over the course of the year, eBay saved $50 million by removing this type of search advertising from its plans. While the budget amounts that we are looking at are likely somewhat smaller, the lesson still applies. What are those assumptions or ideas that we have, and how can we test them? In the eBay example, it was clear from their hypothesis statement what metrics they should track for testing. It was around website traffic from search. When figuring out which metrics to track for your tests, remember that primary metrics are used to evaluate what wins in a test, and secondary metrics provide additional information about customer behavior. Leading metrics are used to predict, and lagging is an indicator of what has already happened. And finally, you will need to document each test in a consistent way and capture all of the necessary details. This will include your hypothesis statement, the test that you'll run, the metric that you'll track, and any criteria that needs to be met to be able to support your hypothesis. Using these standard templates can really go a long way towards helping your team become more competent and consistent in the area of testing and learning. So now that we've talked about what to test and how to test, we need to talk about how we can capture and apply the lessons that we learn. Before you run a test, particularly a large one, it can be helpful to discuss with your team what you're going to do based on the different results that you may see. For quantitative tests, you may agree on the range that will provide you with the evidence that you need to be able to support or not support your hypothesis. And from there, what your next steps will be. You want to avoid instances where you run a test and there is disagreement or unclarity around what the implications are and what the next steps will be. Have this discussion up front. What are we going to do depending on different types of results that we might see? Another important part of capturing and applying learning is to establish guardrail metrics for your tests. Think of these as your safety valve. Guardrails are metrics that keep tests safe. They are metrics that are important that you're not necessarily trying to affect, but you don't want to perform any worse, particularly significantly so. For example, if eBay was running their test on search performance and started to see transactions on the website dramatically decrease, they would and should stop running the test. These results are not within the acceptable guardrails for the organization. So discussing and establishing these guardrails for particularly significant tests or riskier tests can help de-risk the test itself and get people more comfortable supporting experimentation altogether. Another piece of the puzzle in capturing and applying learning is determining the moments or meetings that you will have to review the results of your tests and apply any learnings. I mentioned the concept of agile earlier in the session, where organizations look at results and determine if they want to pivot or persevere. Pivot meaning taking another direction, persevering meaning continuing on the same direction or scaling up. Based on the results of the tests, do we want to continue our course or do we want to change? Having these meetings in your calendar ahead of time can make this process more structured and manageable. When running tests, it's critical that we capture what we have learned. In the same way that it is helpful to have a standard template for writing a hypothesis statement or a test plan, it's helpful to have a structured way to capture your learnings. One way that you can do this is to have a standard template shared across your team where you capture what happened, the impact, and recommendations you would make going forward based on your test. This is very valuable and can accumulate over time. What you want to avoid is having people close to the test might leave their organization or not be involved in the next campaign. We want to be able to centralize and organize this knowledge so it can benefit the organization as a whole going forward. Organizations that are advanced in the area of testing and learning create ways to organize and share learnings from past marketing and fundraising activities, as well as the results from tests and experiments. An important part of making these lessons accessible is to tag or label them in a clear way. Think about the easiest and most effective way for you to capture and share your learnings without introducing too much complexity. Because looking ahead, you want your next digital marketing or fundraising campaign to be informed by what you've learned in the past. In fact, one thing that I would encourage my clients to do at the beginning stages of any new major campaign is to consider what lessons that we've learned before that we can apply this time, and what tests might we want to learn from or trial as part of this campaign. Making sure that we apply lessons from our tests puts us in charge, allowing us to become the wheel and not the hamster. I told you that was the end of my hamster gifts. I did not say anything about hamster wheel images. So now that we've talked about why to test, what to test, and how to apply these learnings, I thought it would be helpful to show how all of this could come together in an example that's very specific to the arts. The following is a short fictional example that brings these principles and practices to life. I'm going to be showing some fairly detailed slides. They may be difficult to be able to see on the screen, and they may be more useful for you to reference going forward if you download them. As I mentioned earlier, these slides will be made available after because there is some densely formatted slides in here, but I think they'd be valuable for you if you're interested in following a similar template. So imagine that you're running a dance company and are interested in offering online dance lessons for families for the first time. This is something you've never done before, so you need evidence to understand if this is the right approach. Where do you start? Your hypothesis, or in this case, your structured hypothesis statement. Remember that we want our hypothesis statement to be clear and testable. So we'll write ours as, remember our format, if we expand by offering online dance lessons for families, we will sell 25 subscriptions because parents are interested in at-home activities with their kids. Now we have something to test. We're not going into a campaign just based on assumptions and gut feeling. We're going to test and have a hypothesis that we can use to be able to do so. Given we're in the early stages of concept development, We will pursue these discovery-oriented tests. And these are, again, designed to give us the evidence that we need. Again, sensing demand, sensing if we're on the right track. One test might be a customer interview. Again, these are all based on the same hypothesis. In this case, we may test 15 parents on their interest in family-focused activities. And we will measure the level of their interest in the concept versus alternatives. And we will be right if over 60% of parents are positively inclined to register. We framed our test around proving our hypothesis. We may also decide to conduct a search trend analysis. In this case, we'll measure search volume using something like Google Trends, as we talked about in the DMFA program, for at-home artistic activities for kids, and measure the domestic search volume. Remember, we can narrow in on the region that we want to look at the data for relevant keywords. We will be right if our hypothesis will be supported if the search volume exceeds 5,000 searches for the month, indicating demand and support for this idea. Or finally, we might do another test. We might also conduct a survey. In this case, we will verify our hypothesis by conducting a multiple choice survey of 500 local parents and measure the level of interest in the concept versus alternatives. We are right if over 75% of parents view the concept positively. Here, we're adding structure and more quantitative metrics to the often fuzzy process of discovery. So now at this point, our tests have supported our hypothesis in our fictional case study here, and we feel confident about proceeding to a pilot launch. However, we have a number of questions and ideas about the proper way to, market the program. What can we do? We may have debates among the team around different things that we might want to try. Again, these debates and arguments are a great source for ideas and for different approaches to be able to test. We will start with hypotheses based on different ideas that we might have. Running tests will give us the evidence that we need to confidently choose a path and minimize risk. In our case, we may have 3 different hypotheses, one around payment plans, one around audience targeting, one around advertising creative. Let's talk about how we might test these different approaches using different kinds of tests. Again, these are focused on validation, not discovery. So to start, we may have a hypothesis that offering parents a pay-as-you-go option will be more popular than just offering a subscription. To verify, we may run a pre-registration test and measure the difference between those that select pay-as-you-go and those that select a subscription. We will be right if over 50% of customers or patrons who pre-register select pay-as-you-go. We see this test being used more and more when people use a waiting list or sign up for something before it's officially offered. It's a way to be able to, in marketing, create leads, as well as to be able to create some intelligence around what people's interests are. A/B testing. So we may have a hypothesis regarding the audience that we want to target in our advertising. We, again, talked a lot about this in the DMFA course. Who are those different segments that make the most sense to be able to target with our campaigns? In this case, we can create a hypothesis based on our assumption that targeting existing patrons will be more effective than targeting those who are not aware of us. So to verify this, we can run an A/B test, different alternative campaigns, a split test, and measure the difference in this case of conversion rates. We will be right if the campaign that targets existing patrons converts at a higher percentage. Again, as I mentioned earlier, platforms like Facebook and Google are making these kinds of split tests a lot easier to be able to run and to be able to see the results a lot more quickly. So if that one is about targeting, what about advertising communication? We may have a hypothesis based on the nature of the communication or what we're actually going to be including in our advertising. We may believe that promoting family fun in our advertising will be more compelling than communicating the benefits of dance. To verify this, we can run another A/B test, but rather than focus on audience targeting, where we would have the same message shown to different targets, we're going to use two campaigns, but have the advertising creative be different. Here, we can measure the difference in click-through rates between different versions, and we will be right if more people click on the family-focused advertising than the campaign that may be running that's focused on the benefits of dance. So we're done, right? Well, not so fast. Testing and learning never stops. After we complete our tests and adjust our marketing plan, we will launch our pilot and start considering other potential improvements and revisit our testing plan. One of the things that we talked about in the DMFA course was testing and learning begets other tests. You can see in the eBay example, there may be other things that they may want to be able to test based on the results of the previous test. Again, knowledge starts to build, particularly in those areas that are really important for an organization. So before we open it up to any questions, I wanted to share 3 tips around scaling testing. Or to put another way, how do you grow a testing and learning practice, some of these tools and templates and processes, and have that extend across the organization and have an even larger impact? 3 ways. 1, find new ways to run tests more quickly with fewer resources. Think about simple survey templates, sample interview guides, and online tools and platforms that you can use. You have likely heard the term minimal viable product or MVP before. Think about what your minimal viable experiment might be, your MVE. What is the easiest and lowest cost way to be able to test or gain knowledge in a specific area? This is what our aspiration is here. Because the less time and money that you require to run tests, the more you can run, reducing your risk of poor performance over time and increasing your ability to be able to take advantage of opportunities that you see in the marketplace. We want to build capacity to be able to do new tests. 2, quantify the benefits from testing the best you can. After all, arts organizations are not eBay. They're resource constrained. And we want to make sure that every dollar we're spending on testing returns more than $1 in benefit. So to the extent that you can, track the impact over time to ensure that your testing and learning initiatives are effective and build the case for additional support. And 3, consider how testing and learning can be applied outside of marketing and fundraising. While the discipline and know-how around running tests can start within your group in the marketing or fundraising department, this same mindset, I hope you can see, and set of processes can be applied across other areas of the organization. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, arts organizations are navigating a period of incredible disruption, which requires new approaches. Testing and learning can help us minimize the risks and realize the rewards in our new normal. I know we've covered a lot of ground here. I hope it's been clear and kind of relevant to perhaps some of the questions that you have or the situations that you're facing around testing and learning. I know just through the DMFA course, so many of you, it's quite inspiring, have tried new things for the first time. I found it really amazing hearing about the first times people have put on, live streams or sold digital content or took to social media to do different kinds of campaigns. We don't want to lose some of these kind of lessons that we've learned over the last two years, as painful as they might be. And we want to have structure in place so they can be adopted more over time. So to conclude, as a summary, the benefits of building a test and learn culture are significant, but the barriers must first be addressed. I think the most important one within here is making sure from the senior most level within an organization that there is not a permission to be able to test and learn, but a mandate to test and learn. Focus testing on what impacts your objectives and where evidence does not yet exist. Remember, we don't want to just have a scattershot of a number of different tests as they pop into our mind. We want to be able to focus our testing on areas that we think are going to have the biggest impact or opportunity for us. Some of the frameworks and prioritization matrix that we talked about can help in this area. A well-structured hypothesis is required for both tests that focus on discovery and validation. Again, what we want to do here is to make something testable. The more fuzzy that we are going into the tests, the less useful the results are going to be. A standardized hypothesis statement is a really useful tool as a place to start. Ensure that you have a clear view on how test results will be used and captured for future use. If we're sponsoring testing and learning, we're putting resources around trialing new ideas. The last thing that we want to do is have that knowledge go out the door. Have a system in place to be able to capture those learnings and a process that they're reviewed over time. And start small when building your testing competency and look to increase your capacity and scope over time. Part of this is thinking about what are the minimal viable experiments that you can do. And part of this is kind of bringing other people along for the ride. This doesn't have to be a discipline that solely sits within marketing and fundraising. You may have the opportunity to be able to level up other areas of the organization to test and learn different kinds of approaches going forward. And the final word on testing and learning will go to marketing legend David Ogilvy, who reminds us all that if you never stop testing, you'll never stop improving. So with that, I am going to stop sharing and I will hand it, kind of hand it over to Lauren to take some questions.
Sure. Yeah, we've got a couple questions in the chat, and folks, if you have any that you're burning to ask, please paste them in the chat now. But one question we have is, Tim, do you have any advice on figuring out the time requirements for testing and learning so you can build it into your work? Does it need twice as much time, 3 times more, 25% more? Any reflections on that?
Yeah, it's a very good question because, obviously we're not all have the benefit of budgets of an eBay and the staff to be able to do these types of things. As a rule of thumb, I don't think there's something that's kind of quantitatively written, but one thing that I would kind of think about is kind of 20%. As if you have and I had a client that focused on kind of 10% of kind of trying any new thing. 10% of it had to be something different. And I think there's another 20% of effort on top of that to make sure that you're putting systems in place to be able to test and learn. And so that has some big implications, right? Because I realize how stretched everyone is, but this is additional work to be able to choose to be able to invest in. If we are going to create some multiple versions of campaigns to be able to do A/B testing, if we're going to be putting more meetings into people's calendars to be able to review results, if we're going to have new systems in place to be able to capture your learning, you need to have the resources to be able to do that. And so I would, as a a rough guideline, I would say it's probably about 20% more than what you're currently doing right now.
Thanks, Tim. Another question is, what if you have a boss or a board that's very dedicated to what you're doing right now, status quo, but you have really great ideas for experiments? What are kind of the top 3 or 4 talking points that you would recommend to make your case and win them over for this?
Amazing question. And it's a theme that we've talked a lot about during the DMFA course of just kind of making the case for change, because that's going to be frank about it, the biggest barrier. If we're talking about increasing the resources required by a minimum, say 20%, who's going to sign off on that? And that's going to be some senior members of your organization. So a couple of things that I would offer up as a way to be able to make your case. One would be starting small. And so there may be some things that are high priority on the minds of people that we might want to be able to test. These are things that maybe competitors are doing or other trends that you've kind of talked about but never done. Find ways to not kind of completely steer the trip, but find ways to be able to do your minimal viable experiment or test. It's easier for people to be able to say yes to a smaller, less risky thing than kind of changing course altogether. The second thing is numbers, quantifying some of those results. And that's where hypotheses and finding the right metrics can help. Success and learning begets more success and learning. So the more that we can do that, it kind of help build momentum. And then I think the macro thing too is kind of going back to, and we've had a lot of great discussions about this in the DMFA course, is that, the market and our patrons' interests and the nature of media is changing. And I think we have to sort of not fight against what those shifts are, but rather think about what is our place within them and how can we start to take advantage of them. And so that's kind of a larger discussion around kind of general strategy. But if there's buy-in of that, that would then end up kind of supporting, okay, how are we going to start to experiment with these types of things? So those would be kind of 3 things that I offer up to kind of make your case and bring some senior folks along.
Thanks, Tim. That's really helpful. A question coming in from the Facebook chat. So you've been working with arts organizations across Canada, different disciplines for the last few months. Based on what you've observed, what's an area that you recommend we really dig into testing and learning about? What are you noticing that we should be looking into?
Well, I think so I'll answer it twice. The first one is the more responsible one, and I'd say it depends, because I think going back to one of the earlier points, what you should be focusing on are those things that mean the most to you, looking at like your priorities, the nature of your patron journey, and where you think like the biggest maybe friction points or challenges might be that you want to be able to address, or the bigger opportunities that you want to be able to explore. So I think they're going to be kind of different for different people. Related to digital marketing and fundraising that we've talked about in DMFA, I think there's probably 2 areas that have been bubbling up, as I know that a lot of people have interest in. One is around kind of digital content and the monetization models. I think that's a huge area of exploration. If you were on the previous booster, we talked a little bit about some of the different things that creators outside of official arts organizations are using to be able to monetize what they're doing. And so that's one area that I know we've kind of talked a lot about that I think would be interesting to explore. And then I think the other area that I know we've talked a lot about is different formats for the kind of content that you're sharing specific to social media. And so that's a whole area that we've explored around the platforms changing, people and audiences, media consumption patterns changing. So as a result, the kind of content that we want to be able to create needs to change to a little bit more bite-sized, more video, or live, more of it, but doing that in a way that is obviously sort of connected to your identity and a larger content strategy. So those are kind of 2 different but related areas around kind of digital content.
Thanks, Tim. And I'll paste in the chat in a second link to the last session that we actually did with Tim on top trends in digital marketing and fundraising. We talked about, video content and different kinds of social media platforms. So I'll put that in the chat. But we do have another really good question coming in through the chat. Do you have any suggestions for documenting the lessons learned so that you can find them when the next campaign comes along and use the learnings there?
Yeah, it's a great question, and maybe. So I have a document that perhaps Lauren, you and I can connect afterwards, because I have an actual a document that you can download, like a Google Sheet that you can use as a starting point. And I'm happy to share that out for people to be able to use. The one word of, and it's sort of simple. It's sort of the different things that you want to be able to capture, the things that are going to be most useful the next time that you're planning a different campaign. One thing that I would say about it, because I've had some clients put their own lessons learned library or post-mortem documents together, is not to make it too complicated, because I think that's the thing that I've seen cause some issues, is that if it feels super onerous to be able to populate, it's just going to die on the vine. So I've seen even really large organizations, I'm thinking of one telco that I've worked with, that it's really like a shared sheet, and there's really 3 different color coding of comments, where it's green is good, yellow is neutral, and R is bad. And so find ways that are going to be easy for you to populate and to be able to manage over time. But I'll send a link to that one lessons learned Google Sheet that is perhaps a helpful place to start.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. We can circulate that either right after today or when we're able to share the recording. Yeah, for sure. So I'm not seeing any questions left in the Zoom chat. Is there anything in Facebook, Laura?
No more questions on Facebook.
Okay, well, I'm so impressed by how much you've been able to cover within an hour, Tim. I think I'm going to invite Catherine up. She'd like to say any last words. Okay. Hello, Catherine.
Hello, everyone. So no more hamster emojis in the chat, I guess. We'll back away from those. Certainly, that's been one of my great pandemic test and learns, is testing the impact of different emojis on the tone and mood of Zoom meetings. So grateful to have that chance. I see that Lauren has put a link to an evaluation survey. It's really short, it's really quick, it's easy to do, and we really do pay attention to the input that you provide to us as part of our testing and learning journey. In fact, before this session started today, I was asking Tim about the validity of taking a test and learn approach, not simply, as complex as it may or may not be, to digital marketing and fundraising initiatives, but to take a similarly interested approach to program design, program content, program delivery modalities. I think every one of us on this call has had the combined privilege and terror of doing a number of things for the first time through the pandemic. We had no choice. It wasn't a matter of a designed A/B test. It was a matter of, we can't do A anymore, therefore let's try B and see what happens. And I think one of the things I wish for all of us is the opportunity to take the time to document some of the learnings from the period of time when, if A couldn't happen, let's try B, let's assess B. If B's not so hot, let's try C. Just that opportunity to look at things from different perspectives, to gather the available data and contemplate how to get better at the work that we love and that means so much to us and to our communities. So Tim, thank you for taking us on this journey. It has been a genuine privilege working with you and with the folks at the Arts Firm throughout this project. I am also looking forward to working with you as the process of distilling the best of the ArtsBoost learnings into a self-guided online program comes to fruition in 2022. And I know I'm not alone in being excited about being able to take this work yet further. Again, none of this could have happened without the participation of our colleague arts service organizations, the Association for Opera in Canada, the Canadian Association for the Performing Arts, Canadian Dance Assembly, and the Professional Association of Canadian Theatres, the team at the arts firm, and the thing that got the wheels moving in the first place was the availability of generous funding from the Canada Council for the Arts through their Digital Strategy Fund. So thanks so much. We will be continuing to share this information. You'll get a follow-up email from Lauren or Boran slightly, I think, later today. Is that right, Lauren? Okay, I'm seeing a nod, so we'll say yes to that. The information will also be available, the recording on our YouTube channel, and looking very much forward to just being able to look back on this and to deepen the learnings in the months to come. So once again, thanks everyone, and I can't wait to see you in person at some point down the road. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.